Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started because it looks like our logging in is slowing down. We want to keep on everybody's time in mind, but people might be joining us as we go. Welcome and thank you for joining us. It's nice to see everybody here today. The name of this is a part of the CADRE learning series. CADRE is an organization, it's a grant that we have to do professional development and support for folks who do research in the DRK-12 part of the NSF. And yeah, Ilana put in the chat about our organization, and I'm on the leadership team. And we had this idea that it might be helpful to hear about professional development for researchers who don't study PD, since a lot of us who are working in schools find ourselves doing professional development, whether it's the focus of our study and our project or not. So the agenda for today is that we are going to go through this brief introduction. Our first panelist will be Ruth Heaton, and then we'll have Lama Jabbar, Jessica Thompson, and Carrie Coca. And our panelists are joining us because they are all experts on a variety of facets of STEM professional development. They worked with a variety of teachers, different grade levels, in-service, pre-service, the whole 9 yards. And so we tried to put together a panel of people who would bring a range of perspectives that would be generative to DRK-12 folks. And I'm very excited for what they're going to share with you. And then we'll present a brief summary of what they talked about and end with 20 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to give a brief overview of where we are in research on professional development. Sorry, this is a cameo from my dog. He is here. Some background on PD research. There's consensus on in the field on what counts as high quality professional development. You'll see lists like this if you've ever done a literature review on professional development. And the consensus goes something like this: high quality professional development focuses on subject matter content, engages teachers in active learning, supports teacher collaboration, models effective instructional practice, provides coaching and support from experts, provides teachers opportunities for reflection and feedback. So this list is taken from a piece from the Learning Policy Institute that's cited below. But you'll see several lists like circulating there like that. The thing is that lists leave things out. They don't tell you how much time is needed. They don't tell you how to design the workshop. They don't tell how to attend to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They don't talk about the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics between professional development providers and the educators themselves. So we're trying to push beyond the checklists that you might come away with if you did a literature review, and talk to people who've done this work in a very deep way so that we can start to generate perhaps something that's more useful for thinking about PD design. So we're taking a cue from the learning sciences and trying to generate some design principles. And so for example, we can ask ourselves, what kind of andragogy should we use with teachers? And I've become a little bit pedantic about using the word andragogy instead of pedagogy, just because when I'm trying to write and I'm talking about math pedagogy, and then I'm talking about teacher professional development andragogy. And I think that it's an important distinction because adults as learners really are fundamentally different in important ways that we need to acknowledge than our children, than our students in school. So I think that we need to kind of keep that in mind. And we have, again, having looked in the literature, we know from a literature review, a metasynthesis that Mary Kennedy did in 2016, that strategy or insight andragogy is actually more enduring than sort of prescriptive, top-down, imitative kinds of andragogy. So we have some things that we know. So we turn to the panelists to say, what other design principles can we share based on either research like the one I just shared, or your own experience? And so without much further ado, this is our panel, and I am going to turn it over to these wonderful colleagues to share. And first up, we have Ruth Heaton.
Oops. Sorry. There we go. Thank you, Lonnie. I'm very happy to be here today. I thought I would start with just giving you a bit of my history. So I started out as an elementary teacher where I taught for 10 years, then went on to get my PhD at Michigan State. While I was there, I studied my own learning to make changes in the way I taught mathematics. And really from that point on, teacher learning and teacher change really has been a focus of my career. After I finished my PhD, I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I was there for over 20 years and collaborated with Jim Lewis, a mathematician in the Department of Mathematics. I was in the College of Education, and I'll be talking about the program of professional development that we created over about a 15-year time span. 4.5 years ago, I left my faculty position, and I am currently the CEO of Teachers Development Group. Teachers Development Group is a nonprofit that provides professional development in math education around the country. We currently have 13 consultants that live around the country. We work in 40 school districts and 12 states. And we engage in a site for about 3 to 5 years. And our goal is to build the capacity of teachers and leaders in that site to carry on the work when we leave. There's always been a synergistic relationship between research and practice in the work that I do. I'm offering a few publications that represent my work over the years. So the first one is a book that came out of my dissertation and is a study of my own learning. The second and third publications are publications that came out of professional development that I did in Nebraska, which was really focused on both learning about these adult learners that Lonnie was talking about and my own learning as a PD provider. The first one was, or the second in the list here, is focused on what we learned about helping teachers study their own teaching in the context of action research projects. And the third one, the third publication here, is based on what we learned about coaches. And this ties really closely to what Lonnie said. What we saw in our professional development, when coaches were involved, they went directly to students, K-12 students as learners, when in fact, what they were hired to do was coach teachers as learners. And so in that publication, we talk about how we shifted our own PD efforts to meet the needs of coaches who are thinking about teachers as learners. The last publication will appear in the Journal for Research in Math Education in September. and it's based on an efficacy study of the professional development model at Teachers Development Group. The study was a DRK-12 funded by the National Science Foundation that ran from 2012 to 2017, prior to my moving to Teachers Development Group. What the initial findings of that study revealed is that the model of professional development done by Teachers Development Group had a positive impact on student growth. Further analysis of the student data, when we disaggregated the data by race, what we learned is that non-white students were not succeeding in the ways that white students were. That finding has fueled the work of Teachers Development Group, and I will be talking more about that. So here are current professional development projects happening at Teachers Development Group and a program of professional development that grew over a 15-year time span at the University of Nebraska. I'll talk first about the work happening at Teachers Development Group, and later I'll be using examples from the University of Nebraska when I talk about a design principle. So currently at Teachers Development Group, in the last couple of years, we've secured about $6 million in funding to strengthen Math Studio, which is the first item listed here, and the model of professional development that the organization does. We've tried to write grant proposals that are working on issues of equity from a variety of perspectives. So I'll offer several examples. The co-learning math project is looking at the mentor-teacher, pre-service teacher dyad that is in field placement settings in secondary teacher education programs, and thinking about how to construct tools that will support both the experienced teacher and the novice in co-learning equity-oriented instruction. The community-centered Math Studio is an effort to create professional development that is supporting teachers in teaching mathematics in ways that supports an anti-bias perspective and draws on the strengths and assets of families and students. Rehumanizing Math Early On is an outgrowth of the Math Early On project at Nebraska, with specific attention to marginalized students and developing a bi-directional relationship between families and schools. The Math Pathways project is a project supported by the Oregon Department of Education. Teachers Development Group has been named as a statewide professional development provider to support secondary teachers in learning ambitious instruction, to support a statewide effort to de-track high school mathematics. The projects at the University of Nebraska, probably the most important idea here is that Math Matters, which was our first project, was a $300,000 project. It grew into a program of research that amounted to about $20 million of funding over those 15 years. The dilemma that I would like to highlight here is around the question of how you choose participants to best support sustainability in your project, and to scale up. And I think a question is, who are these participants? Who's going to help you accomplish the goals of your project? Do you choose participants who are most in need of the innovation? Do you choose the strongest possible participants? And one of the things that I've learned over time is that you need to think about accomplishing the goals of your current grant, but you also need to think about what would the next iteration of a grant project look like, and how can you from the start make decisions that will help this grant be successful, but position yourself for further funding. A design principle then that I keep in mind is choosing participants who are already learners and leaders. And there are research projects that support this idea. In the first publication.
5 minutes.
Okay, I'll move along. So what I suggest that you do is rephrase the question. So not who to choose, but who are the learners who will commit over time to learning your innovation, so that they can help you build capacity to later scale up and sustain the innovation. So these are collective variables that I keep in mind. And in the Nebraska project, we did things like ask people to apply. We did interviews of potential participants. Participants in our earliest programs became leaders and teachers in our later professional development projects. The last point that I'd make is that if it's possible for you to think about the design of your innovation as being one that involves learners for the implementation of the project, then in the process of them learning the innovation, they're gaining the skills that are going to help them sustain it. And a very nice example of this at work is any of the work on cognitively guided instruction. And I put a reference there that describes this notion of generative growth. And it's an important idea to consider as you think about selecting participants. You want to choose participants who are going to not only build their own capacity to scale up this project, but they're going to help build your capacity to be successful with this project and to seek future funding.
Thank you, Ruth. Our next presenter is Lama Jabbar.
Thank you so much. Let me see if I can start by sharing my screen. Well, hi, everyone. I am so delighted and excited and honored to be part of this panel. So I want to thank Lani and Catherine and the rest of the CADRE team for putting this together and for organizing this panel. So I would like to start by saying also a little bit about who I am and what got me thinking about what I'm going to be talking to you about today, which is related to issues of affect and relationality in professional learning settings. So I started off my career also as a science teacher and became interested in the study of teaching and learning when a researcher visited my classroom to do a research study. So then the researcher started to engage me in conversation about things that he was noticing in my classroom, which got me super intrigued about this work. And I wanted to do to kind of engage in similar things. So I decided to pursue PhD studies in science education. And I started off with an interest in the side of learners. So I was exploring learners' engagement, learners' sense-making in science classroom. And I quickly became very intrigued by the other side of the story. What are teachers doing to support learners' engagement and meaningful sense-making in the discipline? So I was very fortunate to be a part of or to join multiple projects throughout my own graduate education and later on as a postdoc and as faculty. Different projects that worked with teachers closely to support them to be more responsive to their students, as well as to foster their sense-making in science. And those include the Responsive Teaching Project in Science with David Hammer and Fred Kohlberg, the blended online professional development project that I'm going to draw a lot on today to illustrate some of my ideas around affect and relationality, the Learning Through Collaborative Design project led by Dr. Sherry Sutherland and other colleagues here at FSU, and my recent career project on cultivating teachers' epistemic empathy to support responsive teaching. And I'm grateful for NSF's support, generous support on these projects. But most certainly, I'm extremely grateful for the wonderful teachers, students, and colleagues and mentors who have helped shape my thinking and my ideas about teacher learning throughout the years. I'm highlighting here, it's impossible to highlight everybody, but I did want to highlight some of the scholars and friends who have really shaped the ideas that I'm going to be talking about today. So including Vasal Dini, Carla Finkelstein, David Hammer, Sherry Sutherland, Jessica Watkins, and Shannon Davidson. So in my presentation today, as I mentioned, I'm going to draw heavily on the blended online professional development project, which I worked on with Vasal Dini and David Hammer. And to give you a little bit of context about this project, so what we did in this project is we worked closely with elementary and middle school science teachers to engage them in extended inquiry explorations in science. So our goal was to really focus support teachers to experience the practices and discourses and feelings of the disciplines for themselves as learners in ways that would support them then to do or to engage their own students in their own classrooms in similar experiences. Our PD was a series of 3 courses in over 1 academic year. And most of our conversation in the first and second course were around teachers' own scientific inquiry. And then the focus started shifting and including more conversations about pedagogy throughout. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of what our doing science together was about, so we kind of designed the PD around this idea from Einstein that science is nothing more than a refinement of everyday thinking. And our goal was to engage teachers in that refinement for themselves as beginning scientists, starting from their own ideas, questions, and experiences and intuitions about the world, so that they can then start to identify similar beginnings, scientific beginnings in their students' thinking in their own classrooms. And this goal was reflected in the overall PD structure, but also in multiple messages, such as here in the syllabus, that really emphasized positioning teachers as agentive sense makers in doing science. So as you might imagine, this was different from many of our participants' prior PD experiences. So it did not necessarily match with their expectations about what a PD would offer them. They were wanting things perhaps more like, or they've been used to things in PD that allow them or provide them strategies or tools or lessons that they would go and apply in their own classroom. So perhaps it's not surprising that in the first few weeks, we started to notice that some of our teachers were hesitant to participate in the science discussion and were not as deeply engaging and contributing in the online space. I did forget to say that most of our conversations or our work with the teachers was happening online. We met once per week. I meant to say once per month. So we started off the PD with an in-person meeting, and then there was almost a whole month before seeing them again. And throughout this month, we started to see that some teachers were really hesitating to contribute. So we decided to start our second in-person meeting with a check-in to see what was going on. And we did administer an anonymous survey for teachers to share what's going on their minds and any feedback that they'd like to provide, and then open the floor in our meeting to hear their voice and their concerns and their worries. So I want to give you a glimpse of some of the kind of comments that we started to get. So here's a teacher saying, I need to buy into this process more. I feel that we extended the topic for the time being and need to move on, in reference to a science questions that we were lingering on for a long time. Another teacher saying, you asking us to think for 3 weeks about a helium balloon? I was done with that. And here's another teacher expressing some insecurity about her knowledge in science, saying, there was no way I could hold a candle to the ideas coming out of people's mouths. I was getting discouraged with how smart other people were. I stopped reading what you two, pointing to two of her peers who were positioned as the science guru in the group, saying, I stopped reading what you wrote because I felt stupid, quite honestly. I don't know if other people are feeling kind of this way. So in all of these excerpts, you could tell teachers were not excited about what was going on, and they were expressing a sense of confusion and frustration about our purpose. Why are we lingering in science exploration for too long? As well as some sense of insecurity about their ability to participate when compared with others. And perhaps for those of you who have been or are currently engaged in PD facilitation around reform STEM education, those kinds of comments may not be surprising. We know from Stein and colleague who explained that teachers who are learning and changing their practices are in a potentially delicate position because they are vulnerable to their peers' opinions, the professional development perceptions, and their administrators' expectations. And I will say, as my colleague Carla Finkelstein also highlights, that PD interactions involve negotiations of power, authority, and knowledge. And therefore, they invoke issues of who holds authority for instructional decision-making and whose expertise and beliefs are valued and validated. And these contestations and negotiations of power can provoke intense emotion and tensions that potentially hinder participants' engagement in learning opportunities. So in other words, participating in PD can be a threatening experience for many teachers who may feel that they are being judged or exposed as deficient. And this may be particularly more salient in STEM education PD that presents teachers with images of practice that may not be familiar to them and that may be actually in conflict with some of their own disciplinary conceptions and prior experiences with STEM, right? So when we ask teachers to engage students in scientific inquiry, when we ask them to build on students' own questions and curiosities, when we ask them to problem solve or to integrate across the discipline with our approaches to STEM education, even in PD that engages teachers in discussions around issues of educational inequity and justice, those conversations may raise some emotions, some heightened emotions for teachers who may be interrogating their own roles as teachers and who may be also feeling or experiencing certain strong feelings such as anger or guilt or self-doubt or sadness even. So it's important to acknowledge that participating in PD can raise discomfort and anxiety, and that could lead to resistance for teachers who may feel threatened and vulnerable. So I bring all of this to say that as we talk about, as we know these issues as PD facilitators and instructors, in current conceptions of high quality professional development, there's generally less attention to these issues, to issues of affect and relationality. So I would argue that these issues are under-examined or perhaps under-theorized. And I know that there are some exceptions. I know work from some of the panelists, as well as I know Lani and her colleagues in their work on coaching conversations, for example. I know work by Dana Vederweiss and her research group at Ben Gurion University, really looking at these issues of affect and relationality explicitly. But I would argue that more attention needs to be given to these issues if we want to optimize teacher learning in PD settings. And this brings me to my next point regarding the design considerations that we perhaps want to keep in mind as we carefully attend to affect and relationality in PD. I will highlight 3 of those in my next slides, and I will draw on examples from the online PD that I mentioned to kind of illustrate what I mean by them. So the first PD consideration is the importance of, or the need to make room for participants to share their emotions, anxieties, and concerns. And I think that entails anticipating moments or experiences that might raise feelings of resistance and vulnerability for teachers, and really filter in time around those moments to check in with teachers, right? So for example, in our case, when we saw and realized that doing science for a long time for these teachers is bringing a lot of insecurities and other kinds of tensions, we really took the time in the second in-person meeting to administer an anonymous survey and then to leave ample room for teachers to share concerns and suggestions. But I think it's important to do that regularly, right? Like to kind of seek out feedback, all sorts of feedback on a regular basis so that you can get a vibe or a sense of the pulse of the group. And as well as provide teachers opportunities to reflect together on how they're feeling and checking with each other to kind of ease their sense of like, am I the only one feeling like that? Like the comment that I showed you from one of our teachers. Now, when we make room for these concerns and these emotions, we need to be really responding to them in ways that communicate care and respect, and in ways that help build trust and build a learning community that is empathetic and caring. So then we've talked a lot in our community, in the science and math education community, about the importance of responsiveness in K-12 settings. But I think it has not been as widely acknowledged or emphasized in teacher education. And I argue that if we want to really support teacher learning, it's important to also be responsive to the needs and concerns and emotions that they are bringing to the table. And so in our case, for example, when we heard these concerns that teachers were bringing up, we decided to make multiple adjustments to our course and to our design. But we also needed to keep true to the spirit of what we're trying to achieve together. So we did not want to jeopardize or compromise, for example, them having a genuine experience of sitting with questions for a long time and lingering in uncertainty, even if that was discomfort or uncomfortable for them. So what we did is we took a lot of their logistical suggestions into considerations, but also we did more than that. For example, one of the science questions that we were exploring related to the helium balloon that I showed in the excerpt, teachers started to feel like that question is loaded now with lots of negativities and lots of kind of feeling that they don't want to think about the question anymore. So we decided to drop the balloon altogether, and we launched a new question, a science question that was so empowering and transformative for our learners. And they kind of took it up and flew with it much more comfortably. But as I say all of this, I think it's also important to acknowledge and name and normalize participants' vexations in the PD and support them to use them as an opportunity for reflection, right? So introspect into these feelings and emotions instead of shy away from them, because that could be telling to them and to you as what is going on. And that could open up or create openings in the PD to have explicit conversations about their experiences within and outside the PD. I think it's also important to personalize conversations, and whenever possible, especially when teachers sound like they're expressing lots of frustrations or anxiety, tacitly or explicitly, to pay particular attention to them and send them individualized notes of encouragement and empathy throughout, and invite them to have conversations with you outside of the PD perhaps. And lastly, I will say that this work is hard. It's hard for teachers, but it's also hard for PD facilitators and instructors. And I think, it demands a lot of active and proactive attention and responsiveness to lots of dynamics that are happening in the class, in the PD setting. And I think it also entails openness and responsivity from the side of the teacher educators. So as we kind of need to be open to teachers' worries, discomforts, and puzzlements, we need to enter this space with a stance of humility and perhaps a stance of curiosity, right? So instead of, again, shying away from these tensions, approach them with a problem solving and a curious mind. Like, what are they telling me? What do these tensions tell me? And I also found that in our project, sharing our own vulnerabilities and puzzlements and excitements as PD facilitators can go a long way in terms of establishing an honest and open space, and can encourage our participants, our teachers, to be more vulnerable and more open about their emotions. So I know I'm getting almost at time, but I just want to say on a happy note that while the work is hard, it is possible. And I have some excerpts here. I won't go into the depth, but to say, like, later in the PD, we started to see much more positive vibes from our PD participants. And I will say that the work of humanizing PD is very rewarding, not only for our teachers, but it also is uplifting for us as in PD facilitators as well. If people want to learn more, I have a bunch of publications around this project that I'd be happy to share. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Lama. That was really great. It's coming together so nicely. And without further ado, our next presenter is Jessica Thompson.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here with you in this space. I'm really appreciating how these, Lonnie, I can see why you pulled these folks together, like we really are building. And I think there's a few things that are resonating with me and other panelist discussions that I hope to pull into here as well. So can you see the screen okay? All right.
We're seeing your presenter view, so we see the next slide and so on.
That's not going to work. All right. Let me try this again. Okay. All right. All right, here we go.
You got it.
Thanks. All right, so I'm Jessica Thompson from the University of Washington. I'm a former middle school and high school science teacher, and I don't know about you all, but professional learning when I was a teacher was pretty awful. It was a lot of sit and get PD. And I think as my career started unfolding, I started really attending to how students learn. From there, really thinking about how do teachers learn, and then thinking about mentors and pre-service teachers. And then I needed to think a little bit more broadly in terms of not just mentors and novice teachers, but then also thinking about the systems that they're in, the schools, the school districts, the regions. And so from there, sort of my work sort of started to expand. And in all of that, I've thought deeply about ambitious and equitable science teaching. So that's sort of where a lot of my work has focused on. I think in my most current project now, we're working on what we call critical and cultural approaches to ambitious science teaching. This is the team I have the opportunity to work with, and we're partnering with 4 different school districts, working on building capacity for ambitious and equitable science teaching. Previously, I had worked in sort of some deep partnerships with other local school districts, having the opportunity to learn alongside a lot of colleagues. This one in particular was one where we were thinking about multilingual learners in science and how we can build our knowledge together. So the thing I think I've learned and really carry with me is that across all of these projects, and this sounds really basic, but this idea that teachers really care about meeting the needs of all their students. And I think it's important for us to hold on to that as PD designers, because then we don't take deficit perspectives of the teachers we have the opportunity to work with. We know that they're coming with expertise. We know that they're coming with good intentions of learning. And I think it helps us to also think about, if we all care about this, how do we think deeply about dilemmas like integrating culturally responsive teaching? So if we're committed to teachers and to students, then how do we think about racial justice in particular inside of our science and math PD? And one of the biggest dilemmas I've seen across most PDs, and including in our own, and I'll share an example from our own, is this idea that PD, we want it to be meaningful, but a lot of times it ends up feeling like 2 separate PDs, or or an add-on, where culturally responsive teaching is sort of a second thought. So and I'll share an example. This is actually from our recent PD. In 2019, we sort of went too big, too fast. We were working with 225 teachers in a large urban school district. The first year, 600 teachers the second year. And This was from the summer PD, one of the teachers describing feeling like it felt like two different trainings. Felt in the morning, it felt like race and equity. In the afternoon, it was science. And she says, well, I signed up to take this science curriculum course. And when I asked her, what do you think we need to be doing? She says, be more transparent about how we're working on race and equity within science. And so this is something that we had to sort of get back and revisit. And I want to just say there's many tensions that are wrapped up in thinking about how we integrate culturally responsive teaching with science. Part of them have to do with the curriculum that's being taught, whether it's being taught with fidelity or teachers are asked to teach it with fidelity versus what they're learning around culturally responsive teaching. There's tensions around the size of the PD and who you're trying to reach and how quickly. And there's this, when I think about this from a literature standpoint, there's a lot of tensions that surround this kind of question. If we think about teacher learning, are we attending to individuals or to the collective? And are we attending to, how are we thinking about defining equity? And different partners in your PD might have different visions of what defines equity. So, are we just defining it as equity, is inclusion and access? Are we taking a more critical perspective where we're considering identity, power, politics, this idea of rightful presence? And then we need to take a careful look at what practices are we promoting? Are they race neutral or are they more race conscious? And then the science itself, for my discipline, it would also work for math, is in what ways are we promoting settler colonial science as being steeped in knowledge that is already settled? And so we want to help think about, this can be in tension with science instruction that's really aimed at thinking about liberation and transformation, and that critiques settler colonial science. So this has been part of my journey, is really thinking about ambitious science teaching, but then what are the critical and cultural approaches to this? We were in the middle of this project that's based on these principles, where we were thinking about, we have these sets of practices, but what are the undergirding really educational justice principles that are underneath it? And the pandemic hit, and we had to rethink the work that we were doing. So we had to think carefully about how are we centering BIPOC voices in our PD? How are we centering students' voices in the PD, particularly those who are speaking out, young activists who are speaking out against climate change and showing us a different vision of what science can look like. And the pandemic itself, really sort of multiple pandemics, helped us think about this idea of settled science is really, we're watching science unfold and lives are at stake. And so we had to think deeply about how do we continue to challenge the science that we are promoting in our PD. And we also had to think about what does this mean for having conversations about things that are economical or political. How do we enter those conversations in our own research team, but also with teachers? And as we work, on this recentering collective consciousness and racial equity, injustice in teaching. And teachers are asking for this too. So it's not just us sort of taking this big pause and re-looking at what we're doing. It's also, teachers are asking, like, something has to change. This was a teacher in 2020, starting off the new school year, thinking about there has to be a change. And as we started to reimagine what was possible in our PD, we found teachers are really excited to move forward, and they want to do the work, but they need help around, this idea of bringing together culturally responsive teaching, but for the purpose of racial justice. So here's some design considerations and this is live. This is like what we are working on right now. So I'll just sort of share this in the moment. These are real tensions that we're working through and working on. And I'm happy to think with others who want to think deeply about this too. One of the pieces that I think we are not surprisingly learning is that, that you need to have a multi-level theory of learning that designs for racial justice at each level. So for students, for teacher learning, for network learning, and that we center this idea of collective consciousness and racial equity and justice. But really what that translates to is radical care for particularly BIPOC students in our schools, and thinking about, as we think about that, it's sort of thinking about what do we need to sacrifice? How do we need to be vigilant? And how do we need to check our own understanding and attunement to what's happening in society and how we respond to it? So we found that it's really important to center histories, futures, and expertise and perspectives of BIPOC scholars and activists, so that it means that we sort of decenter ourselves as sort of white scholars and make more space for voices, experiences of our colleagues. And we've changed the nature of the PD. We've changed the nature of how we took a step back and thought about how do we need to really engage in these topics ourselves. So as a research team, we're doing a ton of research to try and think about what do we need to learn, as well as then trying to prioritize that with the teachers we have the opportunity to work with. And this is a quote from a teacher: is I don't really have the chance to do meaningfully have professional development where I'm going back to the research. She describes it as going back to her college days, where it's a chance to sort of go back and relearn. We've also found that in this challenging of ourselves, we have to think about, we're challenging ourselves as people who are organizing the PD to take a critical perspective, because sort of like Lama was saying, like we have to be willing to be uncomfortable along with teachers, but also think about our own vulnerability and share that with teachers, our own learning journeys. So we're inviting teachers to take this sort of critical perspective. And we're seeing that this sort of helps us all think about like questions. Here's some teachers from questions from a recent PD. So how are we elevating BIPOC stakeholders' expertise and voices in their science curriculum? Teachers are thinking more critically about their own biculturalism and how that's important to science teaching. And then this is an important teacher question that I wanted to highlight is, what do I need to learn and unlearn? I think we find that's a question we're all asking ourselves at this moment in time. I believe that, it's really important that you don't have too many ideas that you're trying to go after in PD. Like you want to have a shared vision of what's possible with teachers, coaches, leaders, and that you don't want that to be too distracted. And so we have centered this idea of racial justice within science, teaching and learning. And I want to just give a sense of what this feels like for folks who are involved. Teachers will describe feeling pushed, but they'll also describe knowledge sort of like where we're thinking about white culture and how that's been a part of science teaching. Those stay with them, and that they're thinking about this last piece down here is wanting to shift their units around social justice so that it's not the add-on. So ultimately, not only is it not the PD, not an add-on, but what happens in classrooms is not an add-on. It is messy, as a quote from a district coach. It's messy, but we also, on the other hand, know that really students can't wait. Teachers are seeing and experiencing learning in a whole new way. They're tackling their positionalities, developing their own critical consciousness, while at the same time creating expansive opportunities for students. This project is a humbling experience, which I think is something that we all hold true. I sort of went about this learning process backwards, because about the PD that I ran since 2010 was really centered actually on Ruth's model using studios. And so now I'm thinking about what happens when we center the kinds of learning that we have now within this model. So it's sort of what you're teaching in your PD and how you're teaching it. And we know a lot about the how, and designing around professional learning communities. This is actually a studio day where teachers are in and out of classrooms examining kids' work. We're doing this over long periods of time. We actually the district ended up funding this kind of work, so studios live on. It's got a sustainability piece to it. And as for someone designing for PD, as Ruth was saying, we're designing for sustainability. So you're imagining the end sort of with the end in mind. And for me, it's something I look at is thinking about how is knowledge and networks how is knowledge being networked and shared, and how is it spreading? So we use some social networking analysis to study how the professional learning and the model of the network is developing over time. Here's some recent publications if you'd like to learn more about our models, and please reach out with any questions. I'm excited to continue to work with you all and think through the kinds of puzzles and predicaments that you all are facing in your PD as well.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was terrific. And we've already started generating some good questions in the chat, so keep those questions coming. Last but certainly not least, we have Carrie Coca, who is going to share with us.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Coca. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to be on this panel with my new colleagues because I realize that all of us have very similar approaches. And so I'm going to actually share a lot about my own experience as a math teacher, as a math coach, and as a professional development provider. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background of my perspective, and a lot of these things I'm thinking through right now. So today, was a great opportunity to start really documenting the types of PD that I'm doing with my teachers. So I consider myself a critical qualitative researcher. I've done a comparative case study of 2 teachers, 6th grade classrooms who use social justice mathematics. I've done interview studies of teacher activists. I've used photo voice. And so now my recent work is actually work around PD. So the teachers from my dissertation study, they were already using social justice mathematics in their classrooms. I wasn't, doing any type of PD with them. But I have a project, I have a Spencer project right now with Rochelle Gutierrez and Mariel Myers, where we are working with teacher candidates, and then we're following them into their induction year. And then I also have an NSF career project, and I'm working with the math teachers of one public charter high school who are learning to use social justice math. And the 2 teachers who were my dissertation teachers are consultants on my project. So they are sort of our social justice math experts on the project, which has really been fun to continue that relationship. And so for this project, I'm gonna put the information in the chat. Let's see if I can navigate this. Oh, thanks, Ilana. So yeah, I think you can see it from there also. But these are the research questions that I'm looking at. And so I'm not, one of my questions isn't necessarily, how am I designing the professional development so that it facilitates teacher learning? But I'm really looking at how do teachers learn how to adapt tasks to make them cognitively demanding and socially relevant? What dilemmas become salient? How do teachers negotiate them? And how do these tasks improve student attitudes about mathematics and feelings of empowerment? And so I'm in my very first year of the project. So I'm working with 2 teachers right now. So when I hear all of the other projects and how big of scope they are, you know, like I have the opportunity to work really with a small group of teachers. And then next year, the 2 teacher leaders and I are going to co-facilitate the professional development with the math department. I'm going to be doing some more in-depth case studies. And in year 4, partnering with a community organization that the teachers will decide in order to really focus on this action piece. And so everything about the design is really meant to be able to form deeper relationships with the teachers and the students of the school. And so as I was preparing for this presentation today, I asked one of my teachers, you know, like, oh, well, what do you think I should say? Like, what advice do you have? And he said, somehow, I don't even know how you do it, but you have an agenda, you have what you want to do, but somehow it becomes our agenda and it doesn't feel like you're pushing anything on us at all. It's an art form. I've grown so much, but you have not told me to do one thing. And then he continued on and he said, an outside relationship can get kind of strained where it feels like a job. And the relationship with an outsider who is separate is like, oh, I'm just doing things for your research. And it becomes dysfunctional, toxic. But I don't even know how I'm helping you. You're just helping me. And I don't even know how I'm helping you. And so I have just really been trying to reflect on like, what are the things I'm doing in my PD design with the teachers? It's really meant to be collaborative with the both of them. And the project itself was initiated by the school. So there is a social studies teacher at the school who is in the ADD program at Pitt, and connected with me, explained to me that their math department was really wanting to use more social justice tasks and practices in their classrooms. And so, you know, it was really great because it just creates such a difference when the questions and the focus has been initiated by the teachers and by the school themselves. I know that's very hard to find. So I feel very fortunate in that. And so I'm going to share some of the design principles that I have been using, that I've really been reflecting on. And in order to do that, I wanted to share a little bit about my own coaching background and my teaching background. So I was a math teacher and a math coach at Vanguard High School. It's a small Title I public school in New York City from 2001 to 2011. And this is one of the Coalition of Essential Schools, you know, Debbie Meyer, Ted Sizer models. So, you know, very much about relationships. All the students called us by our first names. They all had our phone numbers. They had the principal's phone number. And on the upper right is a picture, like I co-presented at a conference with my former student, Raina. And I was a math teacher activist. So you can see this is Jessica. I took kids to protests and rallies, and my principal supported that type of thing. And so I was also a part of someone else's research. So I was a research participant in a portraiture study that was published in 2017 in a book. So I share this to say that I think a lot of the things that I think about are because of these experiences of being a practitioner and being, you know, I don't think he called me a co-researcher, you know, but being a participant in someone else's study. And so one of the things that I realized has been really important is what I have been calling lately is the pedagogy of Luis Delgado's heart. And he was the principal of my school, Vanguard High School. He recently passed away, rest in power to him. But he had an asset-based perspective of all of us, teachers, students, family members. Our whole school was a family. And so even when so I had done my teacher ed program at Stanford with Joe Bowler, and I did my student teaching at the Railside School, you know, that Lonnie did research at as well. And we were doing PD together to learn more about complex instruction. And we actually ended up presenting together about the importance of us being a team. So we always called ourselves the math team. We were not the math department, we were the math team. And this is like the title of one of our presentations that we did. There was no I in team, creating equitable math classes using complex instruction. I think we did that in like 2005. And so everything that we did at the school was teacher-led PD. We had a teacher leadership team. And then I became a coach. And so I was coaching within my own school. So I was teaching part-time and coaching part-time. And so I learned a lot of coaching principles, which I think is really helping me right now with my career project. You know, where the teacher decides the focus and the goals. We're always building on teacher strengths. And that, you know, obviously it's content focused because it's math specific. And then I became a PD provider while I was dissertating. And again, that was very like team-based, relationship oriented. And so like I said, you know, I have not yet written about, Microsoft auto update. Sorry for that ping. I have not yet written about my PD co-design, but these are some of my suggestions that I wanted to share today. I'm gonna put in the chat a link to 2 issues. So one is from QSE, the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education. And the other one is from Cognition and Instruction about youth participatory action research and participatory design research. So I think it's really important that the research is initiated by teachers. And if not the research, right, like your research questions or what do you want the PD to focus on? I think it's important for that to be initiated by teachers. The decision to participate should come from teachers, not necessarily admin. In my case, it was kind of like a mix of both. Relationship and trust building, like Lama mentioned, is really, really important. And then also I use adult learning principles that I learned when I got my principal certification, right? So like choice is really important. Teachers should also be leaders in the work. And if we can contribute at all to the teachers and the school community, like yesterday, I just did a professional development, not as part of my research, but just for the whole school. I did a workshop on social justice pedagogy, and I co-designed it with a social studies teacher. So this is the social studies teacher who's not a part of the research project, but how I got connected to the school, and has been said already. Oh, sorry, 5 minutes?
Yeah, thanks, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Has been said already, you know, like inviting feedback, anonymous feedback is more honest. I'm really working on this, collecting data in supportive, non-laborious, non-intrusive ways that help teachers. So what I've been doing this year is, you know, I'm recording audio of all of our meetings. But I still am, I'm gonna be co-designing with them a reflection protocol that they're gonna help me design it so that it's not gonna be, hopefully not too labor intensive for teachers when they reflect on their lessons. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on a couple of tensions or dilemmas that I've been facing and how I've been really trying to use an asset-based and a curious lens that has been mentioned also today. So, I mean, one of the things that I've had to do is, because, you know, I was a math coach, one of the things that I noticed in visiting their classrooms was, you know, like while teachers might be using a social justice task, you know, we also need to attend to pedagogy, right? And so we've been really focusing on complex instruction lately. we're using Lonnie's book. And the teachers are really, really into it, you know, but I've had to make that pivot in a way that feels like I'm co-constructing it with them, that it feels non-evaluative. So one of the teachers, for instance, was describing to me this new model that I still don't know. My initial reaction was, it kind of feels like it's tracking within his classroom, but rather than respond, I'm really taking this curious asset-based lens to say like, okay, I need to go see what this means. You know, I haven't yet seen it in his classroom. He just explained this to me yesterday. So I'm just kind of like pausing and reserving my response until I actually get to see what happens. Because my relationship with these teachers is going to last 5 years. And so it's really important to me to be able to be contributing to the things that they are facing in their practice, and not coming in and trying to like police what they're doing, you know, or being this evaluative person. Oh, thank you. And so I think like overall, the things that I think are really important are thinking about power, right? And thinking about a historical power analysis, identity and positionality, and relationships. And then I'll say, you know, maybe I can share later, but I do think that, you know, our identities and teachers and students' identities are also really important for us to think about, and the power relations that happen with that. So yeah, so I'm excited for the Q&A, and I will end there.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And if you all can keep putting stuff in the chat, questions in the chat, we would appreciate it. We're getting ready for Q&A. I'm just going to do a real brief summary here. So thank you to all of our wonderful presenters. I think that was a really generative set of presentations, and I'm looking forward to talking more. This is a slide that has everybody's design principles that I pulled. So if you want to screenshot that, go ahead and do so. That was my consolidated version. I realized I forgot to self-promote because I sometimes forget that, but I actually did just publish a book about teacher learning of ambitious and equitable math instruction that we did try to generate some design principles ourselves. So this is a really timely conversation for me and my thinking. So just quick plug on that one. And now we are ready for the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and facilitate it. So I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see each other maybe a little bit better.
Lonnie, there were a few folks who wanted you to go back so they could take a screenshot.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. Okay, take two. Share screen. Okay. Sorry, I have a dog on my arm. Okay. I'll leave that up for a moment while we look at some of the questions in the chat. Okay. Cool. Okay, so Kate Cook asks that the idea of studio day has come up a few times. I think Jessica and Ruth both talked about that. And would it be possible to say a little bit more about how studio day is structured and how it works within a larger professional learning structure?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. So it's job embedded professional development. We go into a site for 3 days. The first half day is spent with leaders, and we are going into classrooms for short data snaps where we try to get just an overall sense of what's going on in the classroom. And then we use what we see to talk about leaders. what their concerns are, how they're thinking about the practice in their school, with the goal of trying to help them develop leadership voices in math education in the school. In the second half day, we work with the studio teacher. We identify one teacher to be the person who is actually going to enact a lesson. So we plan with that teacher. The next day, we meet with a group of resident teachers and leaders. So these tend to be other teachers and leaders in the school or possibly from other schools in the district who come, and we have a large whole group meeting around what the plan is. The teacher talks about things that they're anticipating might happen, things that they're concerned about, the uncertainties that they think may come up in the lesson, what the students that they want to pay particular attention to. And then we all go into the classroom, and the resident teachers ahead of time have determined among themselves, with the support of the facilitator from Teachers Development Group, what they're going to observe. And it tends to be focused on students. And currently it tends to be focused on students that the teacher identifies as students they are trying to understand more about, students who are, for whatever reason, disengaged, and they're just trying to focus on students who, for a whole host of reasons, are not being successful in class the way it currently is. And that's an overall focus of TDG right now. And then there's the TDG facilitator is coaching side by side the classroom teacher, and they pause periodically during the lesson to make visible the decision making that the teacher is making in the moment. And then following the lesson, there's a whole group debriefing of the lesson, followed by all people, the studio teacher, as well as the residents, figuring out next steps for what they'll do when we return again. We tend to go back to sites 4 times during the year. Then on the third day, the TDG facilitator will go around and do side-by-side coaching with teachers who've requested them to visit their classrooms. And again, the focus is on students who are historically marginalized and trying to get smarter about how we engage them in ways that draw on their assets. And Jessica, I don't know if you want to talk at all about your version.
Sure. Sort of a quick model. Sorry, it's a dog going down the street. We really use it as a way to build capacity within districts. So, starting small with a couple schools, and is where we first started, is running professional learning communities. So it's a part of a PLC structure, and studios are really an opportunity to, we use it as an opportunity to co-design lessons, where we're bringing in knowledge from researchers along. For when we were doing it, we had our sort of thinking about the science coaches in the district, as well as the emergent bilingual coaches, bringing everyone together to co-design a lesson, because it is a time to take pedagogical risks too, and to not do what you've always done in a very safe environment. And so I think we've used it both in terms of, but some key pieces are the co-design, designing for us the lessons ahead of time, and then this idea of like trying to take risks, but also sort of with an attention to thinking about how do you use, we sort of started with 2 schools running studios multiple times a year, involving the entire, this was when we were working as secondary, we involved the entire science team. And elementary, we started by choosing teachers from across the district at the same grade level and sort of went to the same school. So there's different models you can use, but it's similar to lesson study in a way that it just opens up your practice and conversations about it.
Great, thank you so much. Lama, Kate Cook asks, do you notice any relational and affective differences in PD in groups that regularly work together, like from the same school, or groups that are from different schools?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kate. I will say that thinking back to the project that I mentioned, the online blended online PD, one challenge that we faced, we worked with different districts and different schools in that project. And as I said, most of our conversations were happening, or most of our work was happening online. Some of our teachers were the only teachers in their schools working with us, and some others were like in a group together from the same school. And what we noticed is for those who were working, and again, to contextualize, this is the blended hybrid format that also contributed to that issue. But for those who were by themselves, many of them expressed feelings of isolation, or that they are not engaged with others in co-thinking, or like being in the school, you could just walk in the hallway and chat about the science, or do something, reflect together on the PD, which were the experiences of the other teachers who were together. So they were able to kind of co-think and reflect together on things outside of the in-person PD meetings. So that was a factor, but that led us to also creatively problem solve together and figure out ways to kind of pair teachers together and create structures outside of our in-person meetings, because they asked for it, where we try to facilitate that work for them as well, so that they create, or they have a sense of community too as well for them. But the other thing I will say too, that I think it's a complex question, because so it's not as simple as saying, oh, if you're from the same group, right? Because one of the other things that we saw that surfaces more in these contexts as well, when you're a teacher who is in a real explicit learning position, you are opening yourself to learning, you're making yourself more vulnerable even, and more transparent. One thing that emerged for some of our teachers who were from the same group, and I'm referring to one teacher in particular who I'm really vividly remembering right now, who felt that she became more vulnerable. She was working with these same people, but now her identity as a learner, as a science thinker, as a teacher became more exposed, and she felt threatened because of some of the positionality within that group that she was carrying into the PD context. And for her, she was more of the novice teacher in the group. She was less confident in her science, and those issues became so salient and so present for her. She was so attuned to them in that context. Unfortunately, she was one of there was other things going on for her at multiple levels, but she was one of the teachers who did not continue with us in the PD. So I don't think it's a simple question, but I think those are important things to consider when we think about designing with an eye towards affect and relationality.
Thank you so much for that, Lama. We have time for one more question. And I think, Carrie, if you don't mind speaking to this, Rachel Lambert asks, I'm really curious about negotiating participatory action research and grant funding. How could someone negotiate doing PAR with teachers and also apply for grant funding with a solid research design with research questions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually wrote my project as participatory design research and not participatory action research because of that same dilemma. Because I had a hard time trying to, both think about the questions with the teachers and the whole design with the teachers. So the way that it is now, it's like we get to design the PD together, but I was able to do the research design on my own. Yeah, I think that's a good question. Oh, Lonnie, you're muted right now.
Yes, of course, I'm muted. We haven't been doing this for all this time. I just want to share with everybody what the follow-up is going to look like, because there is a sequel. We haven't found a date yet, but sorry, I forgot to put this in slideshow mute mode. When we send out the video of the webinar to the DRK-12 community, we will also be have signups for consultations. There'll be each panelist, including myself, will have 3 20-minute consultation slots, and it'll just be on a first come, first serve basis. So just watch your inbox for the reservation link. And we're going to have a follow-up webinar where each of us presents one of our consultation cases to kind of further extend how we apply our ways of thinking about PD to different kinds of design challenges and dilemmas that are situation-based. So I noticed in the chat some of the questions we didn't get to are questions about the size and how many participants you recruit and other things like that. And hopefully some of those issues will come up as well during those consultations. So we'll have a chance to follow up and present on some of those other issues. This is not the end of our conversation. It's the first of 2. And we hope that some of you will be able to partake of those consultations. Actually, it looks like we might have time for one more question. So let me go ahead and I think I saw something else that was kind of for everybody. It was about the participants. How do you decide? I mean, because some of you are doing PD with really large groups, really large scale, and some of you are doing more small scale work. So maybe if a couple of you, one of you who's doing larger scale stuff could speak to it and how you chose to do that, and somebody who's doing smaller scale can respond.
I think Ruth and I are in the category of larger scale, but I would say that we, and maybe Ruth, you find this to be true, is that like starting small is actually really important to get to know your community that you're working with, the teachers, their concerns, the multiple initiatives you're trying to reconcile with. Like starting small is the place to start. You don't want to start, you know, when we were working with a local school district, we started with 2 schools and then grew to all of the schools in the school district. So I think starting small is key.
Jessica, how did you know when it was time to move to bigger scale?
Oh, what a great question. We got pressure from the district to move. They said it happened to be that test scores were rising in the schools that we were working with. And so there's some, which I question whether that's the main motivator, but you know, it was pressure from the district was asking for that more principals, more teachers. So then we sort of had to roll it out where we thought about, okay, what's phase 2, what's phase 3? And then with an eye towards, that's also where we had to think about how do we start building teacher leadership to help as we start growing so that this can be sustainable.
Great. Carrie, you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. I'm just going to ask you to maybe explain why you're starting, that you have a whole year devoted to co-design with 2 teachers. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so actually, and I didn't even know this until recently, but they were telling me that I'm one of the first researchers who's been working with their school, because they were a very well-functioning school. And so a lot of teachers have this attitude of like, well, we already do that. You know, like who is going to really be able to help us and bring something new to what we're already doing, because they are honestly doing such great work already. And so, like I'm of the mindset, I mean, you know, because of my background as a teacher, that like teachers should opt in. So I'm really trying to like kind of like start small. So, you know, like one of the things that I love is that a social studies teacher did one of the social justice math lessons, you know, right? And then yesterday when I was facilitating the PD, a learning support a special ed push-in teacher was talking about, she didn't use the language of complex instruction, but she was talking about the importance of students being heterogeneously grouped, right? So I'm starting to see, how things are starting to affect other teachers. And so I'm really hoping that with that time with the teachers and them seeing me around, and I'm going to all of the math department meetings so that people start to trust me. And even like one of the teachers that I'm working with, they said, they were like, oh, Miss So-and-so, she asked you to show your slides again. Like, usually that person is very critical when people come in, so I'm just very like small, trying to get people to trust me and to see me as almost like a member of the community, so that's my strategy.
It goes back to what Lama was talking about, but the relational part of the work. So that's really helpful. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of our panelists once again, and thank you to our participants for coming. And this conversation will continue at not too hopefully later date, and look for that email if you're interested in a consultation. All right, thank you.